Hello, and welcome to The Why with James Hsu. I know it's been a while since the last episode, but I'm excited to announce the return of this podcast with one of my good friends, Arun Rajappa. Arun is the regional manager for Riot Games India and South Asia. He's also an author. He recently released a book called Failing Well, a short book on product management. Don't let the title fool you. It's not just about product management. It's about Arun's life, his struggles, his growth, and how all of that applies to his evolution as a human being. And it's beautifully laid out. It's very readable, and it's one of the best books I've read this year. I think there's a lot here to offer, whether you're a product manager or just someone going through life as we are. We are going to talk about the book, but we're also going to talk about how to live life, what it means to be vulnerable, what it means to be a leader with empathy. Arun is a very wise person, and I got a lot out of the conversation. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Arun Rajappa. Welcome to The Why with James Hsu. Today I'm joined by a very special guest who is also a dear colleague of mine from our past lives together. I'd like to welcome Arun Rajappa, who is the regional manager for Riot Games India and South Asia. Arun, how are you doing?
Hey James, doing really well, and it's so nice to be here and so nice to chat with you again. I have always enjoyed our conversations, and I'm looking forward to this one as well.
Yeah, definitely. No pressure. I mean, all we're doing is we're having a regular conversation and we're just happen to record it, right?
That's the best way to do it. Yeah.
I have to imagine that over the years, maybe at Riot or other places, you've gotten a lot more comfortable with just speaking publicly. I mean, it doesn't, not necessarily with some of the topics that we will be talking about today, but I have to expect that you become quite the proficient public speaker by now.
I think over the years, definitely public speaking is something that I've had the opportunity to do and to get better at. And the thing that I miss, though, and I think that's what this kind of a conversation allows for, is to almost go off script, right? In the sense, most public speaking in a professional context is it's quite straight and narrow. So you don't explore the edges as much and push the boundaries on the conversation, which I think speaking on podcasts or speaking with close friends, whether it's recorded or not, that can allow you to do. And so that's something that's always much more fun. So I miss those kind of conversations. So I'm excited about this one.
Right. I would definitely have to assume that you've been in a lot of senior leadership roles, including the one that you are in now. So when you are speaking live or publicly, there's always got to be some level of gravitas and just making sure that you're saying the right thing to motivate the teams and whoever is listening, right? Whether it's internal or external stakeholders. That's not to say that we're not going to try to put you on the spot during this conversation, but I think it is a little different, as you mentioned, like when you're preparing something for public consumption almost versus having a one-on-one, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think when speaking with a team, let's say in a town hall, or when you're kind of doing a public event with an audience, you're trying to often repeat a few key points multiple times and kind of reiterate so that the few things that you want to land actually land. But as I kind of said, what you're not trying to do is have a dialogue, right? And a dialogue is something that's much more open-ended, much more exploratory, much more back and forth, right? And it's not as much a one-way street as maybe presenting in a town hall might be. And for me, I've always been a guy who's enjoyed a lot of dialogue, who's enjoyed a lot of not coming from a place of talking to an audience, but really talking with people and sort of both of us learning through that process. And so I really enjoy the podcast, the conversational format of it, because it allows for learning, growth, fun in both sides of that conversation. Yeah, it kind of reminds me almost of this. Just to tell you a different story, right? I remember for the longest time, I was kind of growing through Microsoft and Google and my various, uh, you know, uh, past careers. And I remember that people used to say, hey, you're now a senior leader and you should speak with gravitas or you should speak with a lot of presence. And uh, I think one of the things I always felt through my career journey was almost not, probably not the underdog is the wrong way to put it, but maybe more of uh, not part of leadership, but part of the team, right? And so I would always hang out with my team at the back of a room in a town hall. You know how it is, right? In many of these town halls at Microsoft or other companies as well, you'll usually see a setup where the more senior you are, the more in the front of the room that you sit in, right? And I always used to sit at the right at the back of the room and hang out with my team and kind of make
Mhm.
fun of the speaker. And so I used to identify a lot more with being part of the team and being part of the tribe rather than being part of leadership, which was always more fun for me, I would say. But then I used to get this feedback once in a while that, oh, you should be part of leadership and you should have a certain presence. But yeah,
Yeah, you should be
yeah,
at the front at the very least,
yeah,
right? Or
you
so
should
they
be at the
say.
front. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 I think this is actually what makes, well, two things. I think, first of all, I think as a product manager, as you touched on in the book a little bit, we could talk about that later too. I
Hmm.
think a lot of product management, or being a good product management, or not failing, as to use
Hmm.
the terminology you have, is just fitting in well. And I think fitting in
Hmm.
well also requires a bit of trying to be one with the team,
Mm.
as opposed to being in some sort of superior power level or
Yeah.
structure. Now that's always unavoidable because we're working with people, so
Hmm.
there are always going to be power dynamics and things like that. But I feel like in my career, like what has worked the best is trying to swallow one's ego, and that can include doing whatever it takes, which you touch on in the book, in terms of filling in the gaps. It can also mean just sitting in the back, like just trying to fit in as one of the people. And the second point I wanted to make is I always felt like, even though we had a, full disclosure, those who are listening, like we did intersect at Microsoft. That's how we knew each other. Even though we didn't work together for a super long time, I always
Hmm.
felt a little bit of a connection to you because I felt like, in some ways, despite being from different cultures, like we are kind
Hmm.
of similar, maybe in some ways, in terms of that mindset. Like we try not to take ourselves too seriously, because I think in large companies like that, there's always people that are, everyone's talented, don't get me wrong, but I think
Hmm.
some people have a stronger ego or force of will than others. And I would always say, it's not even a strong word. I would say I've always struggled with, like, who am I supposed to be in a
Hmm.
company as
Yeah.
a PM? How
Yeah.
much do I exert my power and authority? Because we do have that. And how
Hmm.
much do we want to, like, sit in the front of the room versus the back of the room? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's kind of how there's always that dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. And, I really resonated with what you said there about the force of will. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. I think recently I've been writing a little bit about it as well in my own sort of journaling, because I've thought about this and I've kind of struggled with this too, because I think naturally I gravitate to being part of a tribe, being part of a team. And my own justification for that was that what really matters is building things that help customers, right? And so what's like the power dynamic often is in service. I used to feel that it was often in service of your own career growth, not necessarily in service of the product that you're building for customers, right? And so I maybe 5, 7 years ago, I definitely was in a mindset of being part of the team is what allows me to unlock value for customers. And being part of leadership is in somehow or some way chasing a more selfish ambition of career growth. But I think as I've grown through my career, I've also realized that those it isn't an either or. Oftentimes, being in positions of leadership allows you to bring your most value for what you want to do, which is build great products for customers or build great games for players, right? And so it's a little bit of that trap of fearing the full extent of the potential you can be when you also choose to not be in leadership positions. So that's how I used to feel, but I think I've that's a place I've improved and moved on, where now, as you kind of said, being able to make a choice of, do I want to be part of the tribe in this particular context, or do I want to be part of that leadership setting? And what really helps with building the right things for our customers. That's kind of the way I think about it. I think I naturally gravitate more towards the tribe even now, but yeah, that's the way I think about it.
It sounds like it is situational, right? So, we
Hmm.
think about situational from an individual perspective, perhaps sometimes, but
Hmm.
it can also have such a profound effect on the team as a whole. Because if the team decides to go into a tribe mode versus something else, then
Yeah.
as a leader, when you do that, you're mobilizing everybody to hopefully hit on the most optimal way to reach that goal. It's beyond just what we're doing, but it's like your actions have that profound influence. I would say for everybody, not just a senior leader or a PM, but just like even as an engineer or someone in that team. Like
Hmm.
if you behave differently today, that's going
Yeah.
to help. That's going to impact everybody around you, right?
Yeah. Just to kind of riff on that a little bit, the thing I've been from early childhood, I've been massively into sports, right? And I love watching sports, I love playing sport, and also definitely now in Riot Games, a lot into the esports side of things as well, right? And what I've always felt is that team captains are very interesting to study, right? Because in any sport, because you have this interesting thing as a team captain in a sport like cricket, for example, which I'm most familiar with, but I can imagine in soccer as well, where you're very much part of the team, but you also take these moments to step into leadership and kind of raise the team, right? So it's a beautiful place of having to be part of the team, to contribute on your own, and yet also raise the team to the next level. And so, yeah, I just feel like one way I've started to think about it is I'm the captain of this team, and that helps.
So I have to ask, what changed for you in the last 5, 6, 7 years to make you fundamentally embrace this kind of optionality in being in the metaphorical front of the room versus back of the room?
Hmm. Yeah, just being very candid and vulnerable here, I would say. One of the products you are familiar with and that I worked on for a fair bit of time at Microsoft was a product called Microsoft Kaizala. It was something that I poured in a lot of my heart into. I think I grew the most as a product manager building that product. Um, but it also didn't end up going the way I wanted it to. It had, I would say, limited success, but it didn't have that breakout success that we had hoped for. Within Microsoft, it was definitely seen as a success because it was the first product that was being built out of a remote team in India, from concept to actually building the product out, scaling it, thinking about the GTM, thinking about how to monetize it, all of that. Um, and then kind of going through this place of, hey, there's Microsoft Teams also. I mean, for your listeners who don't know what Microsoft Kaizala is, it was meant to be a chat application, very similar to WhatsApp, but maybe like we can almost say a hybrid of WhatsApp and WeChat to power a chat platform with micro apps. All right. And so as we started to grow, we also saw that inside Microsoft, Microsoft Teams was taking off, right? And I think there was a strategic decision made on let's go with Microsoft Teams and not Kaizala. And that was a very a tough pill for me to swallow as a product manager. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what could I have done better. Did I do something wrong? All of that. And I think and in that also, I was very, very close with that team of product managers, engineers, testers. It was, uh, it wasn't, it's one thing to say that that was my team, but it almost feels like we were one team, right? And so it hurt when Kaizala didn't go well. And I think finally there were two things that helped me kind of get out of that funk, right? One was what I would kind of call realizing this idea of too much empathy, right? I think empathy is
Oh,
a really good thing. And I really, really feel like yeah, I don't want to say that it's something that I would stress or everyone should develop. But I think there are places when you start to feel like, oh, we are all um, we are all kind of losing, we suck, whatever, right? And sort of bonding over misery in some sense. And I felt like, oh, I'm in that space, and that's not a good space to be in. And I think a related thing was what we speak about often of having a victim mindset, all right? And I realized that, yeah, I like in the after Kaizala didn't go the way I wanted it to, maybe 3, 4, 5 months, I was in a mindset of being a victim, right? And I realized that, hey, I'm a senior leader, and for me to feel this way and to sort of also cause the entire team to feel that way in some sense is not healthy. It's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for the team. It's not healthy for our customers. It's not great for the company. And I realized that I don't, in this situation, I need to step out of this place of being part of the tribe to being a leader, right? And what that means is actually disconnecting with the team in a certain way to be able to raise the team up from that sense of failure to a place of realizing that life's okay and we can move upwards from here, right? And so that was a big switch in my mind from saying, hey, I identify and bond with the team to saying I need to help the team come out of the place we are in to a better place. So that really that experience of failure really helped me see that there are two distinct choices that I can make. I knew it for the longest time theoretically before that, I would say, but to actually experience it and fail and to raise up and uh, then pull up my team felt like a huge learning and a breakthrough for me. Yeah.
mm, that is so true. Because if you were just continue to be one with the tribe,
Yeah.
then it would be a kind of self-reinforcing or self mutually perpetuating
Hmm.
negativity spiral is the way I'm interpreting that. Because
Yeah.
if the majority of the team thinks, oh, this sucks, like,
Yeah.
and we can't move on from that, then if you're also going to believe that, you're also going to be impacted by that. It sounds like the team, Kaizala team, was very close. I think you
Yeah.
used like one team. I would almost call it a family based on what I've
Yeah.
observed because people had a very aligned missions and were working very hard.
Hmm.
That much I could pick up on. So
Yeah.
it's hard, right? Because sometimes you have a family and
Yeah.
you're just like, I think your feelings are valid, but at some point we have to also move on. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely true. And actually, your point about family is so true because I think the other huge influence on my learning in over the years is not work experiences, but is really in raising my daughter. She's 17 now, and I think in raising a child or you know having a family, you realize that there are so many times that you need to uh, be loving, be kind, be empathetic, all of that. And then there are times that you need to switch into being a little tough and saying, hey, you need to complete that, or, really enforcing the rules. And it's such a huge learning for me. I think, um, yeah, like, one of my cousins who's a pediatrist, she always used to say that children don't grow up because of parents. They grow up despite them, to kind of say that, hey, don't worry so much about your child. But I think as the years have gone by, I've realized that it's
yeah,
really the parent who grows through the process of, raising a child, not the child. Yeah.
yeah.
I've grown so much as a parent. Yeah.
I think there's also something to be said for experience. I love this
Hmm.
conversation so far, by the way, because
Yeah.
this is also what I love about your book is that it is about product management, but it's also not. Like it's about product management, but everything is intersected with life and
Hmm.
different things. And this conversation so far just made me think about something that I'm recently going through because I'm mentoring younger PMs now. I'm sure as you are always
Hmm.
constantly as well. It's like just recently I caught myself just even telling someone who's an associate PM, someone who is starting
Hmm.
fairly early in his career, like you're dealing with all of this now, but it gets better, or
Yeah.
um, it's not going to be that difficult in hindsight. But then you
Hmm.
catch yourself saying that because, yes, we all know kind of intellectually what you're supposed to do as a parent, as a leader, as a
Yeah.
product manager. And it's almost funny because, like, even the act of listening to this podcast, like, it's almost like, we're trying to deliver something, but can we really do it? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you have to live through it. Like, I'm not going to be
Hmm.
able to say what it's like to be the father of a 17-year-old unless
Hmm.
I've done it. And I've not done it yet. I've not
Hmm.
had that experience. So, um, yeah, it's just really interesting. It just makes me think like how much of it has to be truly experienced versus just theoretical. I don't know if you deal with that too, where you're trying to give perspective or advice on to younger folks in their careers and,
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I mean, and this is where I go back to what I said about empathy, right? I think as I've thought about empathy over sort of the years, I don't think empathy is about finding in other people the same experiences or emotions that you might have experienced, but it is actually recognizing that they have their own experiences, their own kind of uh, journey, but still, what kind of remains fundamental is the fact that we are human and have a human experience that is shared. What I mean by that is, like when I mentor a lot of younger people, I used to find this too, that I had to catch myself from saying things like, um, hey, that movie that we watched, or that movie that you would have seen, and then you realize that, hey, maybe they haven't seen that movie, right?
Or maybe they
They
weren't
might have.
born yet in my case,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
some
No,
movies.
actually, that's so funny because, like, and now it starts to hit you as you keep growing older. But recently, I was telling somebody the same thing. I was telling them, I really like the soundtrack to that movie. And they said, oh, yeah, yeah. My dad used to hear that all the time. That movie released 2 years before I was born. And I was like, oh, my God. Yeah. But,
Yeah.
but then, so I think. To your point, I think it's not about shared experiences outside of the human experience which is shared, but I think so many of us come from such different places. It's become it strikes me even more now because in Google, that year and a little bit that I spent there, I the worked on Android and Play Store, focused on bringing Android to the next billion people, right? Looking at the India market specifically. And um, what I really loved at Google was the number of actual customer visits that we did in smaller towns in India, meeting people who were using Android in the most interesting ways. I still remember in this small tier two town, we met a, like a couple. They had two children. They had one phone between that couple, and the two children were going to school, and this was during COVID. So the two children used to have to use the same phone for Zoom classes, right? And kind of completing their classwork. And of course, it felt great that, as Google, as Android, were sort of enabling these kind of possibilities for people. But then, as a product manager, the reason I'm kind of riffing here is as a product manager, you really end up spending so much time thinking about what do our customers want, and the trap in this is to often think that your customers are like you, right? And but in that experience for me, I realized that I had very little in common with that customer or that scenario. But seeing it is what really made it come alive for me, and the power of what we were doing and the importance of what we were doing. So
Mhm.
I think uh, walking that extra mile to experience what the people you're mentoring or coaching have experienced, I think really helps in coaching. So making that extra effort to understand. I think the last time we spoke, James, you mentioned about how you're kind of getting into coaching, and you end up coaching a lot of younger PMs and other people. And the thing I've always wondered, maybe like I have a question for you, but the thing that I've always wondered is how do you take the time to understand the context of the person you're coaching, right? Because I've always felt like, hmm, I'm giving all these words of advice, but I don't really understand where that person's come from. Their entire, I almost feel like I need to know the person's entire biography before I can tell them what I feel. But yeah.
Yeah, that's such a tough one. And I would just say that from my experience, there's no shortcut to just trying to listen as much as possible and
Mm,
just trying to spend a lot of time having them express where they are coming from because it's so hard, at least for me, to like read between the lines. Like if we just start talking about a work situation that you want my perspective on, it's it's like I often find like I spend a lot of time just going into their backstory. Like, okay, well, when this happened to you at work, like you reacted a certain way, like, but there's got to be something behind that, and it's something they say for coaching, which I think is cliched but true. Like coaching is it is about self discovery. It is about
mm-hmm.
like to be able to coach someone, you have to also master yourself or try to coach yourself. And so
Yeah.
I'm constantly finding it such a rewarding exercise because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'll have a conversation with somebody and I'm just like, well, they're thinking this way, they're reacting this way. And I think about my situations, like why was I defensive when this happened? Like, why did I feel bad when I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
involved in this product meeting? Like,
Yeah.
why did I feel this way when my manager like went above me to make a product decision or whatever it is, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot to unpack, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's it's hard to generalize the answer, but I think it just like comes from really trying to understand where they're coming from. And as you
Yeah.
said, they're not coming from the same place. Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly what you said, I felt that too, which is listening is such an important part of not only being a coach, but even a senior leader. I had this fabulous manager at Microsoft called Ganesh Pandey at one point,
Mhm.
and he used to give me this feedback like every year, every 6 months, saying you don't listen well, right? And I used to be like, what do you mean, right? And
Yeah.
so I remember this went on for about a year. Every 3 months, he used to say, you need to improve your listening. And I would be
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't know what this means. And then after a year, I went back to him and he said, I have different feedback for you now. And I was
No.
like, okay, that's good. Tell me what your feedback is. And he said, oh, you've become really good at pretending that you're listening, but you're still not listening. So, yeah,
You mean like eye contact and nodding or
yeah, like
whatever?
so I used to do this thing of eye contact and nodding and like making taking notes and all of that. But he said you still don't listen to the person, right? You're just uh, you've become really good at pretending that you're listening. So it was such great feedback for me because I realized, I've been working on it, but probably not in the best way. So, yeah.
How did you improve your listening over time? Not we're not talking about this pretending to listen, but I think
Mhm.
over time you have become a better listener, certainly in my interactions with you. So
Yeah, I think definitely for me, the very tactical thing that has helped is playing back what I'm hearing and either through summarizing or by asking questions. So that has definitely helped for somebody who feels like they're not listening well and wants to make a sort of immediate short-term improvement. I think that's a good thing of actually it forces you to pay attention. It forces you to paraphrase and repeat what you're understanding. So I think that's a great way to actually do it, a great practice. But the other thing that has helped me a lot is my own practice of meditation and paying attention and improving on my awareness. Um, over the last several years, I haven't been as consistent at it as I would want to be, but I've definitely spent a lot of time in the mornings when I wake up and I spend time meditating. And that helps me a lot with actually being in the moment and paying attention to what the other person is saying and improving my awareness of what is being said. So that has helped a lot.
I've heard a lot of good things about meditation. I may have even try to
Hmm.
meditate on my own with the assistance of an app or something like that. But it's something that I found really hard to stick.
Hmm.
I'm wondering if you have any perspectives or advice on how to get started as a novice at meditation because I find it so hard. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny, right? Because it's just about sitting and paying attention to your breath, but it's so hard, and
It's like listening to
especially for
yourself and it's hard, right?
yeah, and for me, it's yeah. I'll just be very honest in saying that it's been so difficult for me to get to right now where I can sit for like an hour and meditate. It has been really tough. I thought it's something that's going to be simple because the instructions are simple, and I've tried everything. I've tried apps, I've tried having a coach, I've gone to retreats, and I used to find that either in a retreat I meditate, then and then when I'm back in my normal
Mhm.
thing, it drops off. Or using an app, I find that I'm fiddling around with the app a lot. One day I do one thing, the next day I do another thing. I try to kind of surf, and so uh, it was all quite difficult, I would say. And then as you know, and what I've written about in my book also a little bit, which is when I lost my parents, it was the worst because a lot of people told me at that time, hey, why don't you try meditation or therapy? But it was really tough because I found that I just couldn't breathe, right? I used to really struggle with breathing deeply, and I used to have this very shallow breath and have a lot of anxiety. So it used to be really tough. So let me just start by saying that that meditation for me and maybe for many listeners, it's tough. It's not an easy thing. I think what has helped for me is to simplify it to its bare bones. I think a lot of books talk about this, but we skip past this too fast, which is when I started building the practice, it was literally breathing for 2 minutes or breathing for 1 minute, sometimes just breathing for 30 seconds and paying attention to my breath. And then start from there. And then, like, maybe it took me a few months to get to a place of where I could do this for 5 minutes. And then, like, after that, maybe get to 10 minutes. And so it was months before I could get to like a 15, 20 minute kind of situation. And I think at the end of the day, what really helped me was no apps, no music. It was just sit, pay attention to the breath for 2 minutes, right? And that was
Okay.
so really paring it down to the minimal worked for me. So
Yeah, but at least starting really small, right? Like I'm going to do
yeah,
30 seconds, I'm going to do a minute.
yeah,
Um,
really small and really small for a long time. I mean, because I think because I tried the really small thing many times before it clicked. Because I used to do this thing of okay, Monday to Tuesday I'm doing 30 seconds, and then Wednesday I'll do 5 minutes, and that doesn't work, right? And so
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah. So
This actually, I don't know if there's an exact overlap, but it does remind me a bit of running. Like I've
hmm
become really interested in long distance running over the past year. I might even say that it's become my version of meditation, even though I don't technically meditate. It's like,
hmm
sometimes I enjoy running without music and just hearing the breathing and the steps. But I think there's a commonality in that maybe it's just my personality, or maybe it's just a lot of humans. We all want things like quickly. And so I
hmm
get impatient. Like, okay, why can't I just sit still for 5 minutes, right? It's the same with running. Like, why can't I get the results that I want? But I think running for me has been really humbling because it's taught
hmm
me that things take time and it's going to be really hard. And you just
yeah.
have to repeat the thing, even if it means like running a shorter distance, but just to like get used to the rhythms and getting your heart rate acclimated or a
hmm
lower heart rate acclimated, like that takes a lot of time. It could take months or even years. And so you can't be too impatient with it, even though there's a part of us, I probably being career professionals, like we want results, but it's just so hard. But I can definitely
Yeah.
see some parallels. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I would say I partially agree. So I used to run a fair bit as well, and did several of these half marathons and one full marathon. This was maybe 10 years ago. So I'm familiar with running, and as I told you, I play a lot of tennis. I used to play a lot of sport. And I used to say this thing, one of the people I've referred to quite a bit in the book and is definitely a huge influence on me is Rajiv. And Rajiv had this, he's meditated for like 25
This
years,
is
right? And
Rajiv Kumar, who
yes,
whom
there's Rajiv Kumar, who's
at Microsoft.
the, yeah, he's the head of Microsoft India, the R&D center. So he's meditated for many, many years. And I used to tell him, oh, yeah, I run for meditation or I play sport. And he used to say, no, no, that's not the same. And I didn't understand it then, right? So I'll tell you in my own practice, what I've found different. I think it's definitely true what you said in running, starting small and building up. That practice is very similar to how I think one should approach meditation or tennis or music or anything, right? You start small and stick at it for a long time, doing the small stuff really well before building on it. I think the other thing I found common is that both meditation and running and tennis for me, uh, you can get into a meditative state where your thoughts disappear and there's a sort of subduing of thoughts and you're in the moment and you're you almost have this exhilaration from not thinking right anymore. And so that's common. But the thing I found very interesting in meditation is that when you just sit, thoughts keep flowing, all right? And so you go through these phases or spaces of when you're not thinking, and then like maybe that's for 2 seconds, and then for 10 seconds you have all these thoughts coming. And then what you need to do is consciously take your attention away from your thinking back to your breath, right? So for me, what has been different from running or tennis personally is grappling with letting go of your thoughts consciously and getting back to your breathing, um, which is a state that you naturally enter with running and tennis. I don't know whether this makes sense, but one of the books I read, which I really liked, was this book called 4,000 Weeks, and in which I think somewhere the author talks about um, having to take this really cold water shower or like being having cold water dropped on you, and as somebody who's meditating or paying attention, you just pay attention to that sense of cold water hitting you, right?
Hmm.
The reason I mentioned this is a lot of meditation for me is grappling with something that's really hard, and then getting to that meditative space or state. So the grappling with what is hard is actually grappling with my thoughts, and I'm like, oh shit, I again went off on that tangent. I just need to pay attention to my breath, right? And then,
Mm.
oh, heck, again I got caught up in my thoughts. I need to come
Yeah,
back to my breath. So it's that realizing to come back to your breath is what has been so enriching for me in meditation.
definitely. Back to breath, back to basics, I would say.
Hmm.
Like it
Yeah.
just that reminder that we are like human and being human fundamentally starts from taking breaths
Yeah.
or breathing air and being able to survive
Yeah.
on oxygen.
No, I'm just going to bring this back to the thing about listening. When I said that I used to pretend that I'm paying attention, it's like I used to make eye contact, I used to hear what you're saying, but I used to have this internal monologue going on of, let's say James is saying that, Arun, you need to be better at presentations. And in my head, I'm listening to James, I'm making eye contact, but in my head, I'm kind of saying, oh, James doesn't get what happened this morning in the presentation. I was so busy. I was late for my late to wake up, and my dog refused to go out. Whatever, right? I'm having this
Hmm.
internal monologue, and I'm
Hmm.
not paying attention to what James is saying. And so with meditation, it's the same thing that happens. You have this internal monologue, and then you kind of realize, oh, I can let go of that, and I can actually go back to paying attention. And so the practice of letting go of that internal monologue has helped me the most in listening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to mention you brought up, I think in your book, you actually recommended as one of the books is the book you just
Hmm.
mentioned, Oliver Burkeman. Is it
Yeah,
4,000 Weeks? I think that's what
that's
the.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was also a huge, huge fan of the book when I read it. I think it's one of the few productivity books that's actually real, you know? Like it's not
Yeah.
just about like how do I inbox zero or get
Yeah.
more stuff done faster. It's more like an essay or a treatise on just being at peace with the fact that you're not going to be able to accomplish everything.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask to make this a question: like, is it one of the more impactful books you've read in that space, or like, do you have other recommendations, or do you think that's the one?
No, definitely. I mean, I read voraciously, so I have so many books I could recommend, but that one really stayed with me. Again, it was, so much of reading is also uh, not contextual, but it's like that you almost it. I feel having read so much that sometimes books come to me when I need them, and so that book again was something I read soon after I lost my dad, and it made a huge impact on me, especially the early chapter where he talks about when you think about the I don't know billions and billions of people who've lived through history. But when we think of historical figures, we probably remember like maybe a few thousand, right, of those billions. So just letting go of this idea of uh, your name will be known in history, or you're going to achieve something great that's going to be remembered for generations. Letting go of that is it's very liberating, and then you can start on the real work, right? So I found that part very impactful. To be again vulnerable, candid, one of the things that happened for me was my dad passed away uh, during a COVID wave, not because of COVID, but during a COVID wave. And he was a person who was very well respected, very well loved, both by family and by his professional colleagues. But because he passed away when he did, nobody could attend, the cremation or the service and the rituals that we have. And and so I had a few calls, and right after he passed away, me and my wife came down with COVID. So we were just in our individual rooms dealing with that. But then I was like, you know, maybe 5 days later after he passed, or maybe 10 days later, I was like, the calls have stopped, right? So it's just me alone, and my dad's gone. And it felt like he'd been forgotten, right? And so for me, when that book came along, then it really hit me that yeah, we are on Earth for a limited time, and we will be forgotten, and that's okay, right? And so yeah, and then you can kind of start your real work. So
Yeah, I mean, not to make too much light of it, but I definitely think about how, in the grand scheme of the universe, even someone like Barack Obama is like a
yeah,
pebble, right? In the
mm-hmm.
grand scheme
Yeah,
of it all. So
yeah,
I think there's a kind of danger in thinking too much about that because it can lead
mm-hmm.
to what I think is nihilism. Like, why do
Mm-hmm.
anything?
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't have that much significance. But I think there's a way to think about that as like just as the cliche goes, like you just enjoy being where you are, and maybe as you said, like with your recent challenges in the family, like having the grace to accept that. I don't know if that's like the
Mm-hmm.
right term, but
Yeah.
it's just handling things with grace, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as an aside, and I'll send you this video later, but one of the movies I really enjoyed a couple of years ago was Everything Everywhere All at Once. I don't know whether you watched it and you enjoyed it. I loved the movie. And then after that, I saw this review of the movie, perhaps. I don't remember how I came across the review, but it was a video about modernism, postmodernism, and metamodernism. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that because what I liked about the movie and about this video review also was that I think the modernist way of thinking is uh, of you being the hero, right? A hero of your story and the hero's journey in some sense. And a very postmodern outlook is a cynical, nihilistic kind of take on it that hey, nothing matters, we're all going to die at some point, right? And that's not my intent, or I think Oliver Burkeman's intent in the 4,000 Weeks book. But I think the meta modernism, which both from an art movement as well as movies and music, it's about knowing that you're on earth for a limited time, and let's make the most of it, and having a very optimistic outlook towards it. And So that's what I really appreciated about the movie, and that's kind of the outlook I have now, which I find very liberating. That hey, yeah, we are here for a limited time, but let's have fun. Let's help each other out, and let's make each other better. So yeah.
Yeah, just going into your book a little bit. It's called
Hmm.
Failing Well. Failing Well, and the subtitle is A Short Book on Product Management. I want to
Hmm.
just first ask you about Failing Well and the way you framed it. How did you choose that framing? Because a lot of the chapters are about ways that you have failed.
Yeah, two stories there. Of course, I think when I look back at my career and look back at the career of many successful people at Microsoft or Google, people who I admire, I used to find that, hey, they've actually failed more often than not. It's not like they've succeeded every time, but they failed and they've grown through that and they've learned and improved. And even when you look at, from what I know, even when you look at somebody like Satya, or when you look at Satya Nadella at Microsoft, or Rajiv, who was my mentor and manager at Microsoft, there were a lot of failures they went through, right? So I felt like this is something important. But then when I used to listen to podcasts or read books, uh, for the most part, I would say 80-90% of what I was reading or listening to was all about success stories. About, hey, here's the founder of this startup that's doing really well and that has raised money, and this is how they succeeded, and let's listen to them, right? And maybe going back to where we started, I didn't want to be in the space of uh, I know it all and I'm this leader kind of person, so to speak, and I'm going to speak down to my audience of this is how you succeed. I felt like I'm much more part of the tribe that has failed so many times and is trying to pick themselves up and trying to create some success. And those are the stories that need to be told, that need to be shared much more. And so the book is my attempt to share my own stories of failure, because I think that's a place where a lot of people can learn from. Yeah.
Did you have any apprehension about that, or did it ever cross your mind to frame it as success?
No, no, never. I mean, it didn't. I just felt like it. I feel like the book is an extension of me. As you know, it's a very, it's a personal book. It's a part memoir, part product management, I would say. And I've tried to keep it real, and it is a tribute to my dad as well. So I just wanted it to be a reflection of who I am. Yeah, and so yeah, I don't think I had any thoughts about changing the title or wanting to get something out of the book. It was almost like, hey, I'm trying to tell my story. I don't really, I don't know whether I spoke about this book just as an aside in this. There's this book by Rick Rubin called The Creative Act. That, again, was a hugely influential book on me in finishing my own book and completing my own book, because I'd done my book and then I'd stopped working on it. I thought, okay, I've written it, I don't need to publish it, whatever, right? I've finished my work, I don't need to get it out there. But reading the Creative Act helped me publish it, helped me complete editing it. But also, what I really liked about reading the Creative Act was, in the Creative Act, uh, Rick talks about, at some point, to stop thinking about your audience too much and to kind of think about the story you're telling, which is a little contrary or contrarian to how we think about building products, right? We always say, hey, we need to understand what the customer wants. But when I finally did end up completing and publishing my book, I said, I'm not thinking about the audience too much. I'm not thinking too much about whether it's going to be read. It is something that I want to complete for myself for a sense of closure. And I think some people are going to like it, and that's what I'm doing. So that helped me. Yeah.
Absolutely. By the way, I
Yeah.
also love The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. I
Mhm.
think it's great for any creative, whether you're making videos, art,
Yeah.
records,
Yeah.
produce records as he used to do, or writing a book. I think there's a lot
Mhm.
of similarities. But
Yeah.
also I'm just curious, like, how about the act of writing the book itself? Was that fairly straightforward for you? Was it a challenge? What was it like?
Yeah. A couple of stories there. Firstly, I think it was, I wrote the book in almost three pieces. The way the book is structured, it's failing to be, failing to do, and failing to have. And so I think I wrote the failing to be parts first, in maybe over the course of a month. And then I took a vacation when I went off to a place called Cochin in southern India, in the state of Kerala. And during my vacation, I ended up writing the failing to do, which was, it took me about a week, week and a half. And then the failing to have took me another 15, 20 days to write after I got back. And then I kind of got the writing part of it done. And then I sent out an early draft to a few people and I started to get feedback. People told me, hey, can you change the structure? I don't like this. And again, this is going to sound so bad, but I got so much feedback, and then I started to address the feedback and kind of make changes and corrections. And then as I did that, I realized this isn't the book I want to write. I don't want all these changes,
Right.
right? And
Is it my book anymore almost, right?
yeah, it is. Yeah, is it my book anymore? So, and then that's when the book kind of went into cold storage a little bit. And then I read The Creative Act. I read another book at that time, I don't remember, which really helped me. And then I went back to the editing process, and the editing took me a long time to kind of clean up the book, to find uh, the soul of the book, and to kind of remove all the excess stuff, remove the feedback that I didn't want to incorporate, right? you know Often, again, like just going back to product management, many times we feel like when we receive feedback on a product or a spec or a bug, that when you receive feedback, you need to address it. And a totally valid way to address feedback is to say, I'm not going to incorporate it, right? And it's something we perhaps don't do often enough. But yeah, I had to get back to that place of saying, hey, this is the feedback I want to accept, and this is the one that I don't want to, for it to be my book still. And but that was a act of discovery. So the entire editing took me maybe 6, 7 months in all. Yeah.
That sounds about right. So, as someone
Yeah.
who's also self-published and written two books,
Mm-hmm.
one which was more like a memoir, I can fully relate to
Mm-hmm.
that. Yes, there are definitely similarities between writing a book and shipping a product, but
Yeah.
writing a book also has its own inherent challenges. Like you touched on, like almost like being your own worst critic
Mm-hmm.
in terms of being the editor, because I have hired an editor for my books and they can offer things, but I often feel like they're not being harsh enough. I remember
Yeah.
even telling my editor, like, you need to really tell me, like, I'm just going to assume that what I'm writing, half of it just needs to be cut out, that in the end it's going to be like 40%
Yeah.
of what I wrote. But what I
Yeah.
do like about your process is that at least the end product feels to me
Mm-hmm.
very, to use a product term, very lean, very like
Mm.
clean. Like
Yeah.
it flows very well. So it's refreshing to hear, a fellow author talk about,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
process, because that's the hardest thing. It's not The hardest thing is the editing in my mind. It's not about
Yeah.
the actual writing the first draft. That's pretty easy.
Yeah.
You can make it super verbose and just get that out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
You mentioned kind of writing it for yourself. Fundamentally,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a diary or a memoir in one. Were you surprised at all by any of the feedback, like just from friends or readers, just in terms of, is there anything unexpected that came out of the reactions?
Uh, I think two pieces of feedback that I spent a fair bit of time thinking about. One was from a very close friend of mine who said that the book is structured as failing to be, failing to do, and failing to have, and I think it should be structured as failing to have, failing to do, and failing to be, in the sense that, I mean, just to talk about that really briefly, I kind of start with what I feel are not product management things, but almost what you need to be as a person, or who you need to be as a person, which is curiosity and ownership and being strategic and so on. And then much later in the book, I come to very specific things like writing product specifications or how to run a meeting and so on, right? And my friend who runs a small software startup, he said, what's going to be useful to the product managers on my team is to write in as they get into the book to get tools that can help them right away. And all of this being stuff is so big. I mean, they're never going to get to it, right? And so it's not going to be useful. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about, do I want the book to be useful in the sense of a manual, or is it a story? And so that was good feedback because it made me grapple with, am I writing fundamentally a memoir or am I writing a product management manual? And I realized, hey, I want to do a bit of both, but it's definitely my book that's a memoir. So I want to start with Failing to Be. But that feedback was useful. The other one was from my wife, who said, I'd really like it, but I don't think you should put it out as a book. I think it should be a set of blog posts because it reads very much like a blog. And I thought about that, like, should I just put it on Medium or on Substack, and that's what I do. But then, given that it was something that's a tribute to my dad, I definitely felt that having a physical copy that I can give to family, that I can give to friends, is something that I wanted for myself. So, though the format of book versus blog stayed with me for a while, I finally said I want to get this out and I want to feel the physical copy in my hands. But yeah, it made a difference. It gave me a huge sense of uh, closure, accomplishment, of having actually completed something. So yeah, that felt good.
I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I always feel like, as someone who has been an author, like, writing and a book or a blog is fundamentally an act of vanity and ego. It's this
Mm-hmm.
belief that you have something important to say that people should read or should absorb. And even the act of doing a podcast like this, there's a kind of irrational belief that, on my part, that, like, it matters. But I don't think it's entirely a bad thing, because I think a lot of things that happen in the world come about as this kind of based on irrational urges or motivations. So I think it does take a lot to be an author,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm very glad that you did. And I think there's also something very nice about the construct of a book, because it's only through a book these days, I think, that you could really, like, focus in on a set of things that someone wants to share. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally different than a Substack where, yes, you could read all the parts,
Yeah.
but you're gonna get distracted.
Yeah.
It's gonna be in your on your browser or your inbox, as opposed to.
Yeah.
So anyway, I there's a whole lot of things I
No, I
just said
mean,
there, but
no,
I like the approach you took, because I kind of took that
yeah.
approach too. Yeah.
Yeah, but just to kind of speak to the part you mentioned first, because I thought about that too, of whether it's an act of vanity, right? And again, just few different threads here that I'll share. I have felt in thinking about this 4,000 weeks book, also sort of my own explorations of how many times many of us are so motivated by a sense of a legacy or wanting to be remembered in history, right? Um, I feel like many times that's the reason people have kids, right? It's like, how do you live, or how do you live on, right? Beyond your lifetime, right? It's through your children in many ways. And in my meditation, I used to listen to some of the talks and yeah, basically talks by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk. And one of the things he said was, he also explored this thing of vanity. And he said that many times, as a head of a monastery, uh, you have a sangha, or you have your community, because you feel that after you're gone, they are going to carry forward your work, right? And so I think, whether it's writing a book, whether it's doing a podcast, whether it's having kids, or whether it's being a preacher, all of those have this common thing of wanting to live beyond your lifetime. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, right? If you have something to say, and if you feel like you want to be remembered, as you remember, right? Like, just a few minutes ago, I was saying this thing about when I lost my dad. I felt like a month gone by, there were maybe five of us who thought about him, right? And he was forgotten in that sense. So I think a lot of my wanting to write the book also came from a place of what is a legacy I leave. So by the way, I am working on a couple of other books that I'm uh, looking at writing. And definitely one of them is about what I would want to tell my daughter about my own sort of life, about things that shaped me, about not necessarily words of wisdom, but really sharing like a friend how what I went through shaped me and how I learned a few things that she might want to pick up, right? Especially when you have a teenage daughter, you find that the number of face-to-face conversations you can have goes down so much. And next year she'll be off in college. But I'd love to give her something that she can. I don't need to publish it, but something that she can get something out of. But I think a sense of having a legacy is drives a lot of the work that we do, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah.
I love that. I hope you do write that book, whether it's privately
Yeah.
or publicly.
Hmm.
I think that's just amazing. I don't pretend to know what it's like to have a 17-year-old daughter, but I can see that being very valuable for a lot of
Hmm.
folks. I think it's not always so much about like what is the legacy, but is there a way that we could help people? I think it
Yeah.
also just fundamentally can be that. I think
Hmm.
that sometimes I think, if there's one person that got something out of this conversation or something that I wrote, then that's cool.
Yeah.
Like maybe it helped
Exactly.
them think about
Exactly.
it another way. And that's a huge, amazing thing that we as human
Yeah.
beings or rational thinkers
Exactly.
have. And it's just it's a privilege, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know, we can press a button and publish this thing
Yeah.
on online and someone can read it. Like it's at least it
Exactly.
was really hard to think about when I was younger, right?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to leave another movie recommendation here, but I really like the movie Coco, the animation movie. Again, it is a lot about remembering those who've gone and the entire Day of the Dead, but I loved how it was visualized. I loved the colors. I loved the story. It's one of my favorite animation movies. Yeah.
Arun, thank you so much today for taking the time. Thank you for having this lovely conversation with me. I feel like I've got a little bit more of an insight as to your thought process. And for those who are
Hmm.
listening that have not, definitely do check out Arun's book. If you are interested in life, product management, feeling well, or all of the above, I think this is something that is an incredible read. Certainly, it's one of the best books I've read this year. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, thanks so much, James. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I just felt like we had such a nice dialogue. And so I'd love to continue our conversations, whether it's recorded or not. And we should just keep chatting. Yeah. But thanks so much for inviting me.
It's my pleasure.